A millionaire bitten by a venomous snake in the forest collapsed in solitude, seemingly doomed to die with no one knowing. But just then, a poor little girl collecting firewood appeared. She tied his wound with an old scrap of cloth and led his horse through the forest to find help. 3 days later, he followed the only clue, the cloth tied to his leg, to a shabby wooden hut at the edge of the village. And the girl's whispered words left him speechless. "If I die here, there's no one to take me home," Edward Grayson uttered, his voice rough and gravelly, then laughed, a short, dry, frightening laugh in the cold, empty air. He was a reclusive millionaire, once the most successful investor in the financial world. After the death of his wife and daughter, Edward withdrew from the spotlight, living in seclusion at a countryside estate with Storm, his only remaining companion. The wind pierced through his layers of coats, making him shiver, but he knew the chill in his skin was nothing compared to the cold spreading from his left leg, where the snake had bitten him. He tried to grasp a nearby tree, but his hand only found a slick handful of moss. Storm, his loyal horse, stood not far away, tugging at the reins, snorting as if ready to charge, but tied in place. In its eyes was something like helplessness. Just 15 minutes earlier, everything had been normal. Edward had left the mansion at dawn, saying only a curt sentence to his assistant, "I'm heading out." No one asked where. They were used to his disappearances like that, ever since Grace died, his only daughter, the last person he had spoken to with genuine feeling. The forest trail was rough, the ground still soaked with dew. Storm kept a steady pace, while Edward remained silent the whole way. In his mind was the image of the long dining table at home, with 3 chairs, one for him, one for his wife, and one for Grace. Now, only he remained, and 2 empty chairs. He dismounted when he saw the clearing beneath the willow tree. The place where last year he had scattered his daughter's ashes. This year, the tree was bare, its thin branches reaching out like pleading arms. That was when he heard the hiss, soft, quick, sharp. Before he could turn, something jolted his ankle like electricity. A piercing pain shot up his calf, then a burning heat spread. Edward staggered, tried to stay upright, but failed. He collapsed, hands on the ground, his palms now covered in dirt and decaying leaves. No, this can't be how it ends. He looked down at his leg. The bite was swelling, dark purple and oozing blood. The snake was gone. Storm neighed, reacting instinctively, but there was no one else in the forest to hear. He tried crawling toward the reins, but after just a few feet, his right arm gave out. Sweat poured down his forehead. His vision blurred, his head spun as if slapped. For a fleeting moment, he saw Grace, in a little white dress, her hair dancing gently in the wind. She smiled at him from afar. "Are you cold, Grace?" "I'm sorry." He closed his eyes, not to surrender, but because it made the dizziness fade. In what he thought might be his last moment, one thought crossed his mind. At least, I won't die in that mansion. An empty can fell from the cloth bag, clattering down the damp dirt slope before settling between 2 tree roots, silent as it had always been. Sophia picked it up, showing no expression. She put it back into the bag, beneath the layer of cloth lining cold soup. Her hands were thin, fingernails caked with dirt. Her eyes didn't look toward the deep woods, nor back behind her. She just kept walking. She had walked into the forest alone for years. When she was younger, back when her mother was still alive, the 2 of them used to go gather firewood together. Later, her mother fell ill. Then she was gone. Since then, the forest had become a market where no one traded. But it was the only place Sophia could swap a bundle of dry sticks for a piece of bread at Mrs. Delaney's store. Sophia, 12 years old, had no friends. She didn't attend school regularly. She didn't talk much, but she listened a lot. She listened to the wind battering the wooden walls at night. She listened to the shuffle of Walter, her stepfather, dragging his feet from the kitchen to the chair. She listened to the rain hitting the rusted tin roof. And sometimes, rarely, she listened to the sound of her own voice in the woods. Small, but real. The small knife she carried was wrapped in cotton cloth, its tip already dulled. She used it to carefully cut small branches into even pieces. Her hands were skilled, but never rushed. For Sophia, gathering firewood wasn't just about bread. It was an excuse to stay away from home as long as possible. That afternoon, the air wasn't truly cold, but it felt heavy, like water. She walked through the old paths, noticed some hoofprints pressed into the dirt. No one, from the village, rode horses into the forest. The open patch ahead was clearer, where branches had snapped and yellow leaves had fallen in clusters. She stopped when she heard a soft sound, a horse's breath. Short, heavy, uneasy. A large body lay slumped on the ground. The horse stood nearby, its head lowered toward the unmoving man. Sophia didn't move. Her heartbeat slowed. She didn't run, but didn't step forward either. The man didn't look drunk. He didn't look asleep. He lay on his side, half his body draped over a root. His face was pale, forehead damp with sweat, eyes shut tight. At his ankle, a dark, swollen bite. Sophia didn't need much knowledge to understand. It was a snake bite. She set her bundle down, stepped closer, still gripping the knife in her pocket. "Sir," she whispered, "can you hear me?" No response. His eyes remained half shut, face ashen. She looked at his leg. The swelling was severe, the skin around it turning black and purple. She knew enough to know, without help, he would die. Sophia exhaled, barely audible. She pulled off the scarf from her neck, took out dried leaves from her bag, the kind her mother used to treat insect bites, and a piece of straw rope to use as a tourniquet. Her hands trembled as she tied the rope around his leg. Blood no longer flowed, but the pulse was growing faint. Storm stood nearby, eyes alert, as if waiting. She looked at the horse, then at the man lying still. Sophia walked a quick circle to be sure no one else was around. No one. Just the wind and the rustle of dry leaves. She turned back, crouched next to him, and whispered, "Please wait for me. I'll come back with grown-ups. I promise." Then she placed her hand on Storm's neck, stroked it gently, and whispered again, "He needs to live. Don't throw me off. Please." Storm didn't move. She loosened the reins, her hands still shaking. When the horse allowed her to lead, she didn't look back. She only knew that if she didn't go now, the man would surely die. The sky fell to dusk, as if someone had flipped a switch. Sophia gripped the reins, almost dragging Storm out of the forest's edge. Her small legs stumbled over roots and rocks, but she didn't stop. Storm wasn't used to being ridden without a saddle, but the earth beneath him was soft, slick with wet soil, so he didn't resist. Sophia climbed up with all her strength and instinct. Only once, long ago, had her mother shown her how to mount a horse, back when she was alive, and Storm was still a young, stubborn colt. Now, Storm was her only hope. The horse jerked when she nudged his side with her heel. Wind lashed her face, cold and sharp, tears spilling without her knowing if it was from the cold or fear. Sophia bent low, clutching his mane instead of the reins. Each jolt of Storm's gait sent shivers through her bones, but she didn't stop. In the distance, a faint yellow light appeared, a dot against the pale night. She gritted her teeth and shouted, "Go, Storm, go!" For the first time in years, her voice rose above the wind. Storm galloped. Mud-slicked hooves, steady and strong. When they arrived, Sophia didn't go in right away. She tied Storm to the iron post outside and stood there, catching her breath, gripping her shirt. Inside, light from a window spilled across the wall. There were voices and the faint smell of antiseptic in the air. She climbed the steps, knocked twice, and stepped back. A woman opened the door, Nurse Angela, sturdy build, hair pinned back, wearing a cream-colored blouse, frayed at the shoulders. She looked at Sophia from head to toe, surprised to see a child alone in the cold. "What is it, sweetheart?" There's a man bitten by a snake in the woods," Sophia said quickly. "I tied his leg. He's still breathing. I brought his horse here." Angela frowned. "You went alone?" "Yes." "Please. He's near the big willow, about 2 horse runs from the forest's edge." A door inside opened. A man stepped out, white coat, stethoscope still in hand. Dr. Ethan Morgan, the head physician of the small clinic, a man from the western region who once worked in the city but returned home after a personal loss. "What's going on?" he asked, eyes stopping at the horse outside. Angela spoke fast. "This girl says someone's been bitten by a snake in the woods." Ethan didn't ask more. He grabbed the first aid kit, turned to an assistant on shift. "Get the portable stretcher, big flashlight, and warm blankets." Then he looked down at Sophia, not doubting her, just confirming, "Can you show us the way?" Sophia nodded. 10 minutes later, an old jeep rumbled to life. Sophia sat in the back with Angela. Storm was tied beside a small stable near the clinic. She didn't know the man's name, only that her heart pounded with each bump in the road. When they reached the spot, Sophia ran ahead, guiding them with a flashlight. Edward still lay there, unmoving. Angela knelt to check his pulse. "There's still one," she cried. Ethan said nothing. He bent down, placed the stethoscope, cut the old rope, replaced it with a medical splint. Edward was lifted onto the stretcher, wrapped in blankets, and carried to the jeep. Sophia looked at him one last time. His face was pale, but his breath a little steadier. Angela placed a hand gently on Sophia's shoulder. "You saved him." She shook her head. "I just did what my mum used to say. Don't leave anyone behind." The small medical station stood quietly at the edge of town, beside the dirt road leading into the old forest. The faded tin roof reflected the pale light of dawn. There were no car horns, no voices, only the dry sound of early wind slipping through the window cracks, and the faint heartbeat of a man just snatched back from death. Edward Grayson slowly opened his eyes. The dim light stabbed at his retinas like a dull blade. He groaned softly, pain stretching from his left hand all the way to his shoulder. His throat burned dry. Every sensation felt distorted, hazy, like a dream not yet fully shaken. Above him, a yellowed ceiling. A flickering tube light blinked sluggishly. The space heater hummed from the corner of the room, blending with the soft tapping of a pen in Dr. Ethan Morgan's hand, a man in his 50s with salt and pepper hair, calm demeanor, but eyes sharp as scalpels. He was checking the pulse, observing the patient with the gaze of someone flipping through a forgotten file. "He's awake," Ethan said quietly, not looking at the nurse standing beside him. Angela, a woman with neatly pinned grey hair and listening eyes, placed a warm cloth on Edward's forehead. She said nothing, only tilted her head slightly, watching closely. Edward moved his lips. The sound that escaped was as thin as wind brushing leaves. "Those eyes, where are they?" Angela frowned. "What did you say?" He didn't reply, just stared at the ceiling, then shut his eyes again, his body surrendering to exhaustion. Ethan scribbled in the chart, regained consciousness, good reflexes, murmured about someone. A little while later, a woman in her 50s appeared at the station's door. Her face was thin, stern, her brown-grey hair tied neatly behind her head. This was Camilla Grayson, Edward's only sister. She walked across the worn tile hallway, the low heels of her leather shoes making a tapping sound like knocking on the past. She wore a charcoal coat, a pale grey scarf, her face sharp and solemn. Angela opened the door, eyeing the woman with subtle caution. Camilla spoke softly. "I'm Camilla Grayson, Edward's sister. I received a call from Dr. Morgan. My name is listed as emergency contact." Angela nodded, her expression softening. "Yes, please come in." He regained consciousness not long ago. The room seemed to brighten when Camilla entered. Edward still had his eyes closed, but his lashes fluttered. She walked up to the bed, looking at her brother, the man who once appeared in Forbes with a cool smile. Now lying there, hair silvered, skin pale, eyes sunken. Camilla never looked away from him. It had been 18 years since they last saw each other. After their mother's death, Edward hadn't attended the funeral. He never came back. He sent money regularly, but never a word. Camilla didn't blame him, but a quiet void had always remained in her heart. They hadn't fought. Each had simply chosen their own way of living with old memories. One chose to forget, the other to remember. And strangely, this incident had become a bridge for two distant heartbeats to find their way back together. "How is he?" Camilla asked. Ethan replied, "Stable for now. But we'll need to keep monitoring him." The snake bite was deep, with signs of mild neurotoxic effect. Luckily, first aid was applied correctly. Camilla was surprised. "Who gave the first aid?" Angela shrugged. "A girl. Brought him here on horseback. Didn't leave a name. Didn't ask for anything." "A girl. About 12, maybe 13. Quiet, but very calm." Camilla frowned. "So she found him first?" Ethan nodded. "Yes, the girl." All three fell silent. Angela sat beside the bed, gently wiping Edward's forehead again. When she stood, she noticed the corners of his eyes were damp. It was unclear whether from sweat or tears. That night, Edward was delirious. His words were fragmented, incomplete. "Please don't go. Wait. Please." Ethan and Angela took turns watching over him. Camilla stayed as well, silently seated on the wooden chair by the bed, her hand resting on his cold one. At dawn the next morning, when Edward opened his eyes again, he saw Camilla. But he didn't say her name. He asked in a voice barely more than breath, "The girl, where is she?" Camilla gently squeezed his hand. "What girl, Edward?" He looked at the ceiling, eyes searching his memory. Brown eyes, very brown, so sad, but brave. "She saved me." Camilla turned to Ethan. "Does anyone know who she is?" Ethan shook his head. "I only remember her eyes, small, brown, fearless. Looked at me like she was trying to hold me back from dying." Ethan stood beside them, silent for a moment, then handed Camilla a small item wrapped in a plastic bag. "We found this tied around his arm, used to stop the bleeding. A piece of cloth, torn from an old scarf but clean and tightly bound." Camilla took it. The cloth was worn, frayed, but neatly folded, tied in a knot of curious design, like the work of someone who learned sewing from a young age. She thought for a moment, then turned to Ethan. "May I keep it?" Ethan nodded. That very afternoon, Camilla visited 3 tailoring shops in town, carrying the cloth. One seamstress turned the fabric over and over in her rough fingertips, eyes narrowing as she examined each seam. Thin cotton, cheap kind. But this stitch here, not done by an adult. It's small, clumsy, but careful. That girl must have learned sewing from someone at home. She looked up at Camilla, adding, "This knot. I taught it. 3 years ago, a girl came here with her mother a few times, Her mum was sick, very weak, asked me to teach her girl how to mend torn clothes. Camilla leaned slightly closer, her voice soft. Do you remember her name? Number never heard her say a word, but I once heard her mother call her Sophia. That name, like an old melody, rang gently in Camilla's mind. She took out a small notebook, wrote it down, then asked, Do you know where they lived? The seamstress thought for a moment. Not exactly, but I think they used to trade firewood for food at Mrs. Delaney's old store, the one next to the pumpkin trellis. She might know. Camilla thanked her and stepped outside the shop. Snow had started to fall, soft and sparse. In her chest, the scattered puzzle pieces had begun to fall into place. Edward Grayson was fully conscious after 3 days in the hospital. His body was still weak, but the signs of poisoning had been brought under control thanks to timely medication and care. Dr. Ethan nodded after checking his pulse and vision, and Angela made him a light ginger tea, saying it was the first time she'd seen him drink something warm without frowning. From his hospital bed, Edward kept turning toward the window, where pale sunlight slipped onto the porch. He didn't say much, but whenever someone mentioned the girl, his eyes lit up briefly, then softened again, as if holding tightly to something inside. It was drizzling. Not a heavy rain, not loud, just a quiet drizzle, like a cold morning breath soaking through a wool collar and settling shyly on one's hair. The dirt road through the village twisted past old tin-roofed houses, an abandoned gas station, and rows of solitary trees. The morning light was dull, bright enough to see faces, but not warm enough to touch anything. Edward Grayson stood under the awning of a small cafe, long since closed, holding an umbrella borrowed from Nurse Angela, which was almost flipping in the wind. In his hand was a photo of the horse, Storm, one he'd found in an old album, printed out, and carried with him. No one remembered the girl. No one knew her name. But maybe someone had seen Storm. He stopped by every roadside shop, a cobbler's, a small vegetable stall, then the local flea market at the village entrance. At each place, he asked with a raspy voice, Has anyone seen a girl, about 12 years old, brown hair, with a horse that has a star-shaped white mark on its forehead? Most shook their heads. Some shrugged. One person even asked, Did she steal something? By noon, Edward stopped at Delaney's general store, a low wooden house with peeling paint, tin roofing, and a withered gourd trellis beside it. The owner, Mrs. Delaney, about 65, was thin but spry. When Edward stepped in, she was rearranging old tin boxes on the shelf. Excuse me, may I ask you something? Mrs. Delaney looked up, glanced at him briefly, then squinted. What do you need, sir? Edward nodded slightly, his voice low but polite. I'm looking for a girl, about 12, brown hair, often came to this village to trade firewood. Maybe you've seen her? Mrs. Delaney frowned. Sorry you are. Edward paused a moment, then showed her a small cloth, the one Sophia had wrapped around his arm to bandage the wound. Edward Grayson. I'm the man she saved. A few days ago, I was bitten by a snake in the forest. Mrs. Delaney's eyes changed instantly, from wary to focused. She looked down at the cloth in his hand, her fingers trembling slightly, running along the uneven stitches. This, she said hoarsely. I recognize this stitching. That girl came by here once. Didn't talk much, but always traded firewood for stale bread. Polite, deep brown eyes, always looking at people like she was afraid they'd ask her something. Edward gripped the cloth tighter. Do you know where she lives? Delaney thought for a moment, then pointed toward the edge of the woods. Maybe. From that direction. There are a few old houses near the forest. She often showed up after rain. Once I gave her a leftover bun, and she just bowed and left. Didn't say a word. Edward said nothing more. He left the shop soon after, offering a quiet thank you. That afternoon, he headed toward the forest, the path Delaney had pointed out. Along the way, he stopped at an abandoned gas station, where an old man was sipping cold coffee from a paper cup. Edward asked, without much hope, but the old man spoke, as if suddenly remembering. "There's a girl who often passes by in the afternoon, carries a big cloth bag with red string wrapped around it, probably for carrying wood, never says a word, but always stops to rest near the water tank. One rainy day, I saw her cover her hand with a piece of cloth, just like the one you're holding." Edward pulled the cloth from his pocket. The old man nodded slowly. "I don't know her name, but if you keep going toward the woods, past 3 broken maple trees, you'll see a collapsed fence. She might live nearby." Edward nodded in thanks. When he reached the woods, he stood before a broken wooden gate, looking through the thick trees. No one, no voices, just the soft sound of water dripping from thatched roofs onto the earth, and the smell of old mold seeping through the air. A sagging wooden door hung ajar, behind it a low roof hidden among the trees. Edward took a step forward. No barking dogs, no footsteps. But somewhere in that space, he felt it, a pair of eyes watching him, quietly, like the forest watching a stranger. He wasn't afraid, and he didn't speak. He just stood there and waited for something to happen. Have you ever felt like that flower, trying to bloom in the middle of winter? If you have, comment, yes. If not, comment, no. Hiding food again, aren't you, you little brat? The hoarse shout rang out inside the old wooden cabin by the forest. Walter Briggs, a man in his 40s with greasy hair and a scruffy beard, staggered from the kitchen into the living room. His eyes were bloodshot, and the stench of alcohol clung to his wrinkled shirt. He had once been a carpenter, but after the death of his unregistered wife, Sophia's mother, there was nothing left but him, the bottle, and bursts of senseless rage. Sophia stood by the stove, clutching a torn cloth bag. She said nothing. Any reaction only made the beating worse. At 12 years old, she had learned the silence that spared pain. Walter stumbled closer, arm raised. Knock. Knock. The sound at the door came suddenly. Walter froze, eyes narrowing toward the front. "Probably one of those damn oil sellers or some other nonsense," he muttered, then barked, "Stay right there, don't move." He yanked open the rotting wooden door, irritation thick in his voice. "What do you want?" Standing there was a tall man with graying hair, wearing a dark overcoat, Edward Grayson. Edward wrinkled his nose at the smell of liquor wafting from Walter. He glanced over the man's shoulder and caught a glimpse of a small figure retreating, eyes flashing, before disappearing again. "Apologies. I'm Edward Grayson. 3 days ago, a young girl saved my life in the forest. I've come to thank her." Walter squinted, voice dripping with disdain. "No such kid here. You've got the wrong house." "I don't think so," Edward replied calmly, pulling a small piece of cloth from his pocket. "She used this to bandage my foot." Walter eyed the cloth, his tone sharper. "A rag? That proves nothing. Every kid in this village is poor and in rags." Inside, Sophia pressed herself against the doorframe. In her hand was another cloth, identical to the one Edward held. She didn't know if she should step forward, but something, some quiet push, urged her to move. She opened the door just a crack. "Sir?" Her voice trembled, but was clear. "It was me." Edward turned, his eyes softened. "Are you all right?" Sophia gave a small nod. But before she could say more, Walter roared, "Back to your room. I told you, no talking to strangers." He lunged forward, ready to slam the door. But Edward caught it, his eyes suddenly cold. "You hit her, don't you?" Walter yanked his arm back. None of your business. I'll make it my business, Edward said quietly, firmly. I can go to the police, if this continues. Silence. Walter hissed through his teeth. Get off my property. Edward didn't argue. He simply dipped his head and stepped slowly down the creaking wooden steps, as though the weight on his shoulders had sunk into his legs. Snow fell gently on his hair, settling into the silver strands. He knew he had no right. He was neither family nor law, just a man lucky enough to be saved, now trying to save something purer than life itself. His voice carried, not loud, but clear enough for the girl to hear across the yard. You're very brave. If you ever need help, don't stay silent. As Edward left through the broken wooden gate, there was a rustle behind a bush. A small head peeked out. Tom, a 12-year-old boy from the same village. He stepped forward, eyes averted, but voice steady. You came looking for Sophia. Are you going to help her? I've seen her get hit so many times, but no one's ever helped. Edward looked at the boy, not with the eyes of a wealthy man, but of someone who knew what it was to lose. He nodded. Yes, she saved my life, and I can't walk away now, knowing what she's living through. Tom clutched his sleeve, then blurted out, I've seen him hit her. A lot. Everyone in the village knows. They just don't say anything. He looked up, voice cracking. If you don't do something now, no one ever will. Edward went still. Then he bent down, placing a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. His voice dropped, steady and low. You're braver than most adults. I promise you, this time will be different. But to make it work, I need someone like you to help her believe she's not alone anymore. Inside the cabin, Walter slammed his hand on the table. Damn nosy people. Sophia sat against the door, a red mark still fresh on her cheek. From her pocket, she pulled out the cloth like Edward's, hands trembling. For the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of an adult. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight streamed quietly through a crack in the wall, resting on her open palm, where dirt and scratches met something small, flickering, a fragile hope. That morning, the wind was still. Edward Grayson sat in a small cafe at the edge of the village, his hands cupped around a chipped porcelain mug. The scent of old coffee, damp wood, and last night's rain still lingered in the air, until a tall man in a plain uniform stepped inside. Deputy Carl Jenkins, 35, was the only officer still holding down the fort in this area. He wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, and was almost always there when no one else was watching. Edward had asked to meet him. Thanks for coming, Edward said quietly as Carl sat down. You said it was important, Carl replied, pulling the chair in slightly. Edward opened his wallet, placing a neatly folded piece of fabric and a photo of the horse, Storm, on the table. The officer looked at them, frowning. This girl, Sophia, Edward began. She saved me from dying. No one knows her, but I met her stepfather. I saw the way he looked at her. And I don't believe she's safe there. Carl leaned back, voice calm. Do you have any other evidence? Edward shook his head. Not yet, but I believe if you dig deep enough, you'll find it. I used to think I shouldn't get involved, but now, staying silent feels like letting it happen. Carl looked at the cloth again, then slowly nodded. I'll go through the records. No promises. Edward gave a faint smile, his eyes tired but hopeful. That's enough. At the clinic, Dr. Ethan Morgan was flipping through old files after Camilla had told him the strange story of the girl who led the horse to get help the day before. Angela, the head nurse, had first mentioned the frightened yet determined look in the girl's eyes. She didn't say her name, Angela recalled, but when I asked who was hurt, she only said one thing, an old man snake bite, bleeding, then nothing more. When Camilla suggested the girl might be named Sophia Harper, something stirred in Ethan's memory. He searched through the incomplete files from years ago, records of emergency patients without insurance, often folks living in the woods nearby. He stopped at a page. Patient name, Marianne Harper, Sophia's mother. Admission date, 7 years ago. Condition, high fever, coughing, respiratory failure. Notes, no insurance, declined extended treatment. Her face flickered dimly in Ethan's memory. A thin, silent woman, eyes hiding something far deeper than her illness. In another corner of the village, Deputy Carl stopped by the small wooden church. Father Lewis, a gentleman, with a beard white as snow, was watering the roses. Father, do you know a girl named Sophia Harper? Father Lewis paused, then slowly nodded. She often sits at the back during early Sunday Mass, never asks for anything, but always leaves a wildflower on the altar. Carl took note. Have you ever suspected she might be abused? Father Louis looked up directly. I haven't seen it. But I suspect. Children don't go that quiet unless something around them makes them afraid. That afternoon, as school let out, only a few students lingered to stack chairs. Ms. Green was gathering graded papers when she heard a soft cough behind her. It was Sophia, quietly stepping in to turn in a late assignment. She didn't attend regularly, but always submitted her work, often at late hours like this. Thank you, Ms. Green said, about to turn away when she suddenly froze. As Sophia bent down to pick up a fallen pen, her sleeve slipped, revealing a faint bruise on her wrist. Unclear, but enough to raise concern in someone who had raised 3 children of her own. Her voice softened. Are you okay, Sophia? Sophia quickly pulled the sleeve down. Yes, just a fall, ma'am. Green didn't ask further. Not right then. But as Sophia left the classroom, she stepped to the doorway and watched the girl disappear across the rain-slicked schoolyard. Just then, Deputy Carl, fresh from the church, passed by the schoolyard, heading to his car. Seeing Miss Green under the awning, he stopped to greet her. Miss Green, I'm looking into a student, Sophia Harper. Do you know her? Green looked at him, then gave a small nod. I just saw something troubling. Come to my office. There's something you should see. Carl followed her into the staff room. The photo appeared on her phone screen. The bruise wasn't clear, but enough for someone experienced in investigations to sense the severity. I don't think Mr. Grayson was wrong, Green said. The girl never complains, but some wounds don't need words to be understood. Carl nodded. Thank you. You're an important link in this. Late that night, Deputy Carl sat alone in the small police station. Sophia's mother's file lay next to a statement from Tom, the boy who clearly recalled seeing Walter yell and even use a belt to hit Sophia behind the house. Carl sighed, tapping his pen on the desk. Everything was still scattered pieces, but one by one, from Edward, Ethan, Ms. Green, to Tom, they were forming a larger picture. Edward's words echoed in his mind. If I stay silent, it's the same as letting it happen. Outside, the drizzle had returned, but inside, a decision was taking shape. Quiet, yet firm, like a broken bridge, slowly being rebuilt by someone who refused to let it stay that way. The summer dusk cast sunlight through the thick foliage, slanting across the rotting wooden roof, as if trying to reveal something yet unspoken. From afar, the soft sound of footsteps echoed on the damp ground. Edward Grayson stood before the crooked gate. Storm, his loyal black horse, stood beside him, its mane stirring gently in the wind. There was no reply to the first knock. A long silence stretched before the back door creaked open. Sophia, a small girl with tangled brown hair and dark brown eyes, stepped out, a worn shawl thrown over her shoulders. Her eyes widened at the sight of him, and of Storm. "Walter's not home?" Edward asked softly. She nodded. His friend took him out drinking since noon. Edward removed his hat, stood a moment under the eaves, then sat on the edge of the wooden steps. "I want to ask you something. Just need to understand. Not to tell anyone, but to do what's right." Sophia hesitated. Her eyes followed his hand as it rested on Storm's mane in a familiar gesture. After a moment, she sat down on the opposite step, leaving a bit of space between them. "No one's ever asked me that," Sophia said quietly, her fingers laced together, nails still holding traces of soil from helping Camilla in the garden. "I don't even know where to start. But maybe it's from those nights I sat in the dark kitchen, hearing glasses crash, doors slam, and Walter yelling. Some nights, when he was drunk, he said I was a mistake. Some nights, he said nothing, just stared, then slammed his fist down on the table. I got used to it. If I just stayed quiet, it would pass." She drew a quiet breath, then continued, eyes fixed on her fingers. "When my mum got weak, I begged him to take her to a better hospital. But he said there was no money, said it wasn't his problem. I brought her to the clinic. They gave her cough syrup and told us to go home. They said the family refused transfer." Sophia looked up, for the first time meeting Edward's gaze. Her eyes were no longer fearful, just still and deep, like a winter-dried lake. "She died 3 days later. I think back then, if someone, just one person, had cared, maybe things would have been different." Edward tightened the hand resting on his knee. "How old were you then?" "8, sir," Sophia answered softly. "Walter's not my father. He was someone my mum once loved when she was still well. But after she died, he didn't leave. He started drinking. When drunk, he called me a burden. When sober, he said nothing, just looked at me like I wasn't real. Does anyone know this?" No one asked. A long silence fell. Edward looked at Sophia for a long time, then spoke. "Do you know why I came?" "Because of Storm?" Edward shook his head. "Because of your eyes. At the clinic, when I woke up, the only thing I remembered was the look in those eyes, trembling, but steady." Sophia lowered her head. She wasn't used to kindness. A rustle behind them. Sophia glanced around, then said softly, "Greg, Walter's friend. He said if he saw me with a horse again, he'd tell people I was stealing." Edward frowned. "Who is this man?" "Drinking buddy. Hangs around the bar near the old gas station. Stares at me a lot." Just then, hurried footsteps approached. A figure emerged on the path. Greg. He looked at Storm, then at Edward, eyes narrowing. "Aha, I knew it. This girl. I saw her sneaking off with that horse a few days ago. Was she stealing it?" Edward stood up, his gaze sharpening. "I own the horse. And this girl, she saved my life." Greg stepped back, but still muttered, "If Walter hears about this, he won't just let it slide." Edward didn't flinch. "If he knows it'll help me uncover some old truths, I hope he comes." Greg hissed through his teeth, then turned and walked away, leaving behind a trail of acrid smoke. After he left, Edward sat down again. He spoke gently to Sophia. "Did he ever hit you?" Sophia didn't answer, but she pulled up her sleeve. A faint bruise showed on her wrist. Edward didn't stare at it long. Instead, he looked at her eyes. Those eyes, still the same, asked for nothing. Not pity, not fear, not even blame. Only silence. "You don't have to live like this," he said. "You have the right to choose another path. And if you want, I'll be there with you." Sophia stayed quiet. The wind tugged her coat to one side. Storm flicked its mane, standing still as stone. Hold on to that hope, Sophia. Don't let them make you believe you're wrong for simply trying to be good. He paused, waited a beat, then continued, this time slower, weighing every word. You know, if there's a trial, they'll need to hear a real voice, someone who saw it all. You don't need to remember everything, just tell the truth. Because if your voice isn't heard, they'll keep thinking kids like you don't need protection. Sophia pressed her lips together, eyes on the ground. I can't. Walter will find out. He'll try. I know you're scared, Edward said, but you're not alone. There will be people there, me, and others who stand with you. Sophia shook her head, just barely. I can't. I'm sorry. Edward didn't push. He simply stood, nodding slowly. I understand. But if one day you change your mind, just say the word. One word is enough. That night, the weather turned cold without warning. Wind whipped against the rickety roof, letting out long howls, like someone mourning. Sophia sat curled up beneath the attic, her hands still trembling from the fresh bruise on her back. Earlier that evening, Walter had hit her, for no reason. He had only seen the small piece of paper Tom slipped through the crack in the door. If anything happens, run to the edge of the forest. I'll be waiting. And just like that, he was furious, shouting. A bottle shattered on the floor, and his hands, like always, unloaded onto her body, the silence of a failed lifetime. When everything quieted down, Sophia didn't cry. She just sat there, holding her breath, then slowly opened the old window and slipped outside, like a shadow familiar with escape. The night air was damp. Grass clung to her feet. Tom was the first person she saw, standing under the big oak tree near the forest's edge. He had brought a coat and a loaf of bread. You can't go back, Tom said, after seeing the swelling on her shoulder. This time, silence won't be enough. Sophia shook her head, still hesitant, but Tom looked her straight in the eyes. If you don't speak up, someone else will end up like you. This has to stop. In that moment, an image of her mother flashed in Sophia's mind. Thin face, hoarse voice, still smiling whenever she told stories. If someone had stood up for her mother back then, maybe she wouldn't have died. And maybe Sophia wouldn't have had to live like a shadow either. When dawn broke, Sophia walked, not carrying firewood or a small knife for the first time. She stopped in front of the grey brick house where Edward was staying. Her hand knocked, 3 hesitant but resolute knocks. Edward opened the door. His face froze for a brief beat. Sophia. He stepped aside, letting her in. The girl didn't cry. She just looked at him and said, slowly, I want to testify. Not just for me, but for my mother, for the kids after me. I don't want anyone else to stay silent, like she did. Like I did. He held her, not tightly, just enough to let her know she wasn't alone anymore. Without hesitation, Edward called Deputy Carl Jenkins. His voice was hoarse but steady. I have a living witness. The girl wants to talk. Less than half an hour later, the local police car stopped outside the house. Deputy Carl walked in, nodded at Edward, then sat across from Sophia, placing his notepad gently on his lap. You ready? He asked. Sophia nodded. Her voice was small but steady. I'll tell everything. About Walter. About my mother. About what he did. The interview lasted over an hour. Sophia recounted every detail, from the night her mother coughed violently and no one took her to a doctor, to the times Walter smashed furniture in rage and all the bruises she had once tried to hide. Deputy Carl gripped his notepad tighter, the calm in his eyes long gone. When the testimony ended, he stood up and said clearly, each word distinct, I'm not letting this get buried. He left Edward's house and returned to the police station that same night. Pulling old files, he found Marianne's, Sophia's mother's, medical report with a doctor's note. Recommended inpatient treatment. No insurance. At the same time, he requested a full review of social service reports that had once been overlooked, each pointing to a blurred but undeniable pattern of neglect and abuse. He didn't stop there. Deputy Carl went straight to Walter Briggs' house. In front of several neighbors, he read the arrest warrant. Walter Briggs, you are under arrest for child abuse and for indirectly causing the untreated death of a woman, Marianne Harper. You have the right to remain silent. Walter protested, but it was useless. Inside his home, police found objects matching Sophia's testimony, a belt with strands of hair, a torn piece of fabric stuffed under the bed. News spread fast. Edward didn't wait. He went to each person who had been a silent witness in this story. First was Mrs. Delaney, the grocery store owner. Would you be willing to testify that you saw the girl trade firewood, that you noticed the bruises? She nodded, gripping her apron strap. I won't stay silent anymore. Then he found Miss Green, the teacher who had quietly snapped a photo the day Sophia bent over and her shirt slipped. She nodded too. Finally, he went to Father Lewis, the priest who had once spoken with Sophia's mother. I'll tell the truth, the priest replied softly, for the child's eyes, and the mother who once begged for a shred of hope. Edward returned home near sunrise. Sophia had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket draped over her. Storm stood outside the window, calm. He knew. Tomorrow wouldn't be easy. But now, he was no longer alone. And that little girl, the one who once saved him from death, had just begun to save her own life with a kind of courage no one could teach. The sky was overcast. A pale light streamed through the courtroom window, the color of a truth not yet whole. Wooden benches lined up in silence. Police, townsfolk, journalists, all present. At the center, Walter Briggs sat handcuffed, face flushed, his eyes lost, with a hint of anger. The judge tapped the gavel gently. This trial is now in session. Deputy Carl Jenkins was the first to stand, his voice firm, unwavering, every word sealing off years that had been hidden. We have a statement from the child victim, Sophia Harper. There's a medical report from the local clinic submitted by Dr. Ethan Morgan, clearly stating, patient Marianne Harper came in with a critical condition, was advised hospitalization, but did not proceed. The recorded reason, no insurance, relative declined to pay, and signed refusal for transfer. Below, Camilla, Edward's sister, sat close beside Sophia, her hand wrapped around the girl's, offering a calm she'd never known before. Carl continued, we have photographs of the child's injuries, provided by Miss Green, her teacher. We have a witness, Mrs. Delaney, the shop owner, who testified she'd seen bruises and signs of distress every time the child came by. Miss Green was also called to the stand. She adjusted her glasses, voice slightly trembling, but her eyes never flinching. I stayed silent for too long, but when I saw that little girl sitting in class, her hands shaking, sleeves pulled down to hide her wrists, and those purple marks, I knew I couldn't keep looking away. I took photos. I reported it to the school. Tom Carter, Carl said, nodding. A boy with messy hair stepped forward, holding a woolen cap in his hands, his voice small but steady. I live next door. I've seen Sophia get hit. Not just once. Once with a belt, once with a broom handle. I also heard my mum say Walter left Sophia's mum alone when she got sick. A few days later, she died. The courtroom went quiet. Walter clenched his jaw, eyes fixed on the floor. Greg, his drinking buddy, was called. He avoided everyone's gaze. Beside him, Ruth, the one who used to gossip about Sophia, turned pale when she saw her name on the list of pending witnesses. Edward Grayson stood, No raised voice, no long speech. I was once bitten by a venomous snake and nearly died in the woods. If it weren't for that child, I wouldn't be here. But I stand not just out of gratitude, I stand for justice. If we let this happen again, the blame falls on all who stayed silent. The entire room held its breath. Finally, the judge called out, "Sophia Harper, do you wish to speak?" Camilla let go of her hand and nodded gently. Sophia stood, thin, small, but not trembling. Her eyes fixed on Walter, the man who'd scared her into silence. She inhaled, then exhaled. One beat. "I don't want to hide anymore," Sophia spoke, her voice soft but clear, as if each word was a step away from fear. "I used to think, if I didn't talk about it, things would just go away. But they don't. They stay. Every day." She paused, glanced at Walter, the man who once called her a burden. "My mum. Her name was Marianne," Sophia continued, her voice starting to shake. "She worked at a diner near town. Even when she was tired, she always told me stories before bed. One day, she coughed hard and collapsed. I begged Walter to take her to the hospital. He said no, said there was no money. I took her to the clinic. The doctor said she needed to go to the hospital immediately, but since we had no insurance, and Walter wouldn't sign the transfer papers, they gave us cough syrup and sent us home. She swallowed hard. She died 3 days later, in pain, with no one there, just me." A quiet wave swept across the courtroom. Someone began to cry. Walter looked away, jaw tight. After that, Walter drank more. On days he wasn't drunk, he was silent. But when he was drunk, he hit me, with belts, with his hands, or whatever was nearby. Sophia bowed her head for a moment, then raised it again, her voice firm with resolve. "No one should have to live like that. No one should have to stay silent out of fear. I stand here because I want it to end." Behind her, Miss Green wiped her eyes. Tom gripped his woolen cap. Camilla held Edward's hand. The judge nodded. After full consideration of the evidence, testimonies, and statements from the community, the court finds Walter Briggs guilty of child abuse, negligence resulting in preventable death, and witness intimidation. The defendant is sentenced to the maximum penalty under state law. Walter didn't scream, didn't resist. He only bowed his head, and in his eyes, for the first time, there was emptiness. After the trial, Edward and Camilla stood amid the crowd. Edward took papers from the lawyer, then turned toward the little girl. The court clerk nodded, but the process wasn't simple. The lawyer had to file a formal petition. Camilla prepared the documents. Edward submitted a detailed account of their relationship and the reasons for adoption. They waited 3 weeks. During that time, Sophia stayed with a licensed foster family for abused children. On the day of approval, everyone gathered once more in the courtroom. The social worker presented a positive report on the home Edward and Camilla offered. Dr. Ethan Morgan and Miss Green also submitted letters attesting to the significant changes in Sophia since the incident. The judge signed the adoption papers. Edward opened his arms. Sophia stepped into them, as if she'd finally found where she belonged. And for the first time, surrounded by people, Sophia whispered, "Thank you for hearing me." That evening, after the verdict was read, the first snowflakes began to fall on the cold rooftops of the small town. No one spoke. The townspeople stood outside the courthouse, silently looking at one another, as if realizing for the first time how long this place had stayed quiet about things that should never have been met with silence. Camilla buttoned Sophia's coat. The little girl stood in the middle of the courtyard, eyes turned to the sky, unflinching. "I've never seen snow look this beautiful," she whispered, as if saying something both strange and familiar. Edward stepped forward and handed her a new wool hat. Beautiful. Because you deserve to see it in peace. They left the courthouse together, but not to go home just yet. Edward had a thought, quiet but certain, that the girl needed to close that chapter herself. They stopped by the clinic. Dr. Morgan and Nurse Angela were already waiting. Angela handed Sophia an old wooden box. Inside were a few belongings her mother had left behind in the hospital's storage. A hair clip, a few old receipts, and a small photo of Marianne, taken in her diner uniform, smiling beside a coffee pot. Sophia held the photo for a long time. I think she wouldn't want me to remember her with tears. Angela began to cry. She couldn't say a word. On the way home, they stopped at the cemetery. Sophia placed a bouquet of dried flowers, pressed by Miss Green, on the patch of earth where her mother once rested. This time, she didn't cry. She just stood in silence for a long while, as if having a wordless conversation. I'm ready, she turned to Edward, her eyes dry, to begin. On the way back, the sky darkened quickly, as if winter, too, wanted to close an old chapter. Edward slowed the car when he saw a small shop with lights still on by the roadside. He turned to the girl beside him and gently asked, "Would you mind if I treated you to a hot cocoa? It's colder than usual tonight." Sophia gave a small nod, still clutching the photo of her mother. Inside the quiet shop, only the soft clinking of spoons and the fog of steam on the window filled the space. The girl sipped slowly, quietly. Edward set his cup down, then turned to her. "Sophia, you know, you're not the first person who's ever saved me." She looked at him. Curious eyes, but she didn't interrupt. "Once I had a daughter, Grace. She was a year younger than you. Loved drawing on every white wall in the house, and she'd laugh endlessly every time her mum scolded her for the mess." His voice lowered. "One day, on a camping trip, I took my eyes off her for less than a minute. Just a minute. She slipped down a ravine. Just like that, she was gone." Sophia said nothing. She rested her small hand on the edge of the table, gently tilting her head as if to listen more deeply. "I lost her, lost my wife not long after, and for many years I lost myself too. Money, the company, none of it ever made me feel truly alive." Edward gave a faint smile. "Until I opened my eyes in that clinic and saw the eyes of a child who had risked her life to save a complete stranger." Sophia lowered her gaze. "Do you know why I want to adopt you?" he asked quietly. "Because I saved you." "No," Edward said firmly. "Because you survived even when no one saved you. And I believe if anyone deserves a new beginning, it's you." A pause. Then Sophia spoke slowly, for the first time with a flicker of quiet confidence in her voice. "I'm not like Grace." "No," he nodded. "You're you, and I'm thankful for that." The next morning, the snow fell thicker. The road leading into the village turned pure white, like a fresh sheet of paper, waiting to be rewritten from the start. Edward Grayson's small house on the village's edge had been tidied up, fresh again, like a new beginning. In the kitchen, Camilla was rinsing seafood. The scent drifted warmly through the house. Sophia was gently sanding an old lamp with peeling paint. Her hands were still stained green, but her eyes no longer held fear. She was going back to school. She had access to a bookshelf filled with Louisa May Alcott's stories, and she now slept in a bed that truly belonged to her. After lunch, Edward took her out to the stable. Storm was nibbling at the grass, hooves dusted with white snow. Sophia hesitated before stepping closer and placing her hand on the horse's neck. "I know he's not mine," she said softly. Edward smiled. "Storm chose you, and when a horse chooses, all we can do is listen." He paused for a moment, sitting down on a wooden bench, the snow light glowing around him. "You've told me a lot about you," he said. "Today let me tell you what made me change." Sophia sat beside him, listening without blinking. Edward spoke of his youth, how his parents divorced, his mother left, and he was left with a father who never looked him in the eye. He grew cold, grew rich, but hollow. Then came Grace, his first daughter, short-lived. Her death shattered him like a mirror cracked too deep to fix. There was a time he wanted to become ash. "I think if we recognize someone still fighting their darkness, we have to reach them," he said. "We can't wait until they disappear like Grace." Sophia said nothing. She placed her hand over his. Old skin, cold. But she held on. That afternoon, Sophia brought a mug of cocoa to Camilla, then stepped onto the porch. The snowy field stretched out to the village's crossroads, where other children were sledding, tossing snow angels into the sky. She stood watching for a while, still holding the old lamp she'd just restored. Tom saw her, waved. For the first time in weeks, Sophia smiled. There was no more hiding or confusion in her eyes. It was still cold. Winter was still here. But beneath the stone fence, the snowdrops had started to bloom. And Sophia knew, sometimes to bloom in the cold, one must endure a long, bitter storm first. Some children grow up not by age, but by the days they survive. And some people, seemingly frozen in their grief, can still be awakened, just by an eye that truly listens. Sophia had walked through the darkest winter of her life to finally see the snow melt and flowers bloom. Not because she was stronger than others, but because, at last, someone stood on her side. Have you ever felt like Sophia, like you were walking through a long winter no one noticed? And if you have you found the Edward in your life yet? Today, is it hot or cold where you are? If it's cold, put on another layer. Keep your heart warm too. If it's hot, don't forget to drink enough water and rest. Wherever you are, I truly hope you're doing okay. And if you can, share with me what you're carrying in your heart. You're not alone.